What is meditation? Welcome to Philosopher's Corner. I'm John. What is meditation? The standard definition is deep and continuous thought leading to contemplation. That seems pretty simple. So you think about something for a while and you contemplate something for a while, and you might even get to a profound place on a particular matter or subject. It's essentially what philosophizing is. When you get into philosophy, it's really an overall description of saying that you're going to meditate on innumerable subjects, that we're going to deeply, deeply consider and think in a contemplative manner about a series of ideas, concepts, ways of thinking, ways of organizing our minds, exploring how information is processed, and what the connections and relationships are between all of the information that exists in reality, and then why it exists and how it exists and in what manner it interacts with itself and how much agency do we have, and literally any question we can come up with. And one of the cool things about meditating is that it gives us a chance to use what has differentiated human beings from other animals on this planet, which is the ability to contemplate, which is the ability to think deeply about things, and then to come to conclusions about situations and arrive at acknowledgments of things that are, that lead us to the ability to have disentangled ourselves from the most of the brutal laws of the jungle of physical animalism and begin to live in a world of intellectual analysis, or in a world of the fruits of intellectual analysis and contemplativeness, contemplation, meditation, and deep and rigorous thought, which clearly, when you look at all of the animals, if you put all the species on Earth side by side, it becomes clear that Homo sapiens, the reason they're not living like the rest of the animals is because of their intellectual abilities. Just in a natural evolutionary standpoint, that's the number one feature that separated us from the rest of the animals. Now, there are other intelligent animals and plenty of sentient animals, and if not all the animals being sentient, but the prime reason, like, we're living in a man-made world is because of our intellect and the prowess of our minds and our brain's ability to construct a mental world, essentially, that we live in. And the way that we get the most out of our brain, the way we really access the evolutionary advantages and horsepower, so to say, is through the act of meditation, which could rightly be described as concentrated thinking, like lengthy, concentrated thinking. It's an area of time when we just use our brains and our mind to focus on one thing for a length of time. And that's not something that you observe in the animal kingdom. Like, we haven't rolled up on a chimpanzee, in full lotus, meditating all day, and he's like, hold on, I'm meditating. Like, we haven't seen that. You don't see a parakeet on its perch sitting there for 2 hours, just deep in thought, and then at the end it's just like, I got it, we're all one. It could happen, but right now it is happening to Homo sapiens, where we have if you look at the history of humanity, almost all of our progress happens because one human looked around, acknowledged stuff, and then essentially went somewhere and thought for a long time about something, and then came to a conclusion, acknowledged a thing they figured out, brought it back to the rest of the humans, and everybody's like, oh yeah, that checks out. And then boom, all of a sudden now everybody's enjoying the benefits of that one person who just spent some time meditating and thought about stuff. Now I know in the modern era, meditating has a definite connotation of a religious devotional practice and something that you do in a monastery or uh, a temple or a church or out on a mountain by yourself, and it has to be very new agey. But really, that's just a version of the exercise of thinking deeply on one subject uninterrupted for a period of time. It can be done anywhere. I think that's why most people, like, when they're reading a book, they're really meditating. They're meditating on whatever the subject of the book is, or if you go to a movie, you really, in a group meditation, because you're really just thinking deeply about whatever you're seeing on the screen. And usually that's why when people say, oh, it's a good movie or something, it's because the theme is consistent, right? So that even if it's a 3-hour movie with a bunch of characters and different plot lines, you've really just been thinking about like one thing for the duration of the movie. So there's all these different ways for meditations to be had and to be done. A scientist, if they're doing their work, like say they're doing their PhD, their thesis defense, well, really the whole 3 or 4 years that they're working on their thesis defense, they're really just thinking about one subject the entire time. Look at, or, whenever they're working on, oh, I spent 10 hours a day on my thesis. Well, it meant they spent 10 hours just thinking about one subject, really. And it's like that across the board. When you really look at an activity of somebody, especially if it's an intellectually based activity, or actually if it is an intellectually based activity, and you look at their workday, you'll see that their primary thing they're doing in that day, the thing that powers the whole system for them, is them being in meditation, right? Like a lawyer, you get a lawyer, and for all the stuff they do, whether it's filing paperwork, talking to clients, gathering information, uh, you know, appearing in court, whatever it is, at the core of it, a lawyer is only as good as when you see them at their desk and they have all the information and they're meditating on the case. And when they meditate on the case, they're considering all the evidence, all the information, all the rules, procedures. They have all the information and they have a goal in mind. But when they're there and they're thinking about the case, they're meditating on the case. And however good their meditation is on the case, it's a high correlation to whether or not they win that case. Now, of course, it's legal system, so there's all sorts of things at play. But there's a high correlation of how good their meditations are and what the results are in court. And it's that way for everybody. You can look at any sort of doctor, like a surgeon, before they go in to do their thing, they're meditating on the patient. They're meditating on the specifics of the patient. They're thinking about how to get in. They're thinking about the operating room. They're thinking about everything, right? And then they get in, they do it, and it really, like, any line of conscious work, well, really any line of work benefits from meditation. Other ones, it depends how much you need for what jobs. That's why some people would describe some jobs as mindless or some jobs as like really deep. If you're, uh, like I've worked fast food and I don't have to think much about it, but got to meditate on a little bit. Oh, what time do I have to be there? What are my duties today? Like, how am I going to handle this? Like, da 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 da, right? Like, high school, it's like that's the gig, right? And then all of a sudden, at some point, I found myself being a military officer and a pilot, and it's like, well, now I got, tomorrow I have a flight plan due, and I need to go to the flight line, and I got, all these tasks and da 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 da. So I got to take some time and sit here and think about it deeply. Oh, all of a sudden, I'm meditating. I'm meditating on my day tomorrow, thinking deeply about this subject, and then if I do combine it, or if a person does combine sort of the secular job every day, deeply thinking meditation about something, and then you do allow for the fact that there's all these other informations and unseen things we can attract in through meditation that augment the meditation, then we can see, oh, this really does, it's a combination state of allowing information to be processed. Because the brain's one thing, and the brain is the thing we can educate, but then we also have our mind. So we have the brain in here, and then we have the mind, like our worldview that's sort of always here, that goes with us. And it gives us, when we think deeply for a period of time, we can get from here into the mind, and then once we activate the mind can also interact with the greater mind of the universe, of like God itself, infinite intelligence. And that's usually what the meditation and the religious devotion styles focused on, is to get outside of the normal self brain and ego level, and then to get into personal mind, which even at that point they start to say, well, that's like spiritual ego, which is true. And then, but you got to set, you have to have this brain in harmony and focus with your mind, your spiritual mind. And then once those are in focus, then you're in receptive mode to enter into a transcendental state of meditation, of thinking deeply, in which the universe itself becomes your partner in the thought process. And I can say through experience that's true, and I can also say through all of the written history of mankind for thousands of years across the world, that is an accepted practice with highly verifiable results. You know, you go back to like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, and you know, they predate medical instruments or predate scientific instruments by quite a ways, you know, more than 1,000 years. And they were using their mind, their brain, their mind, and big mind to penetrate into the subatomic level to a degree of astonishing accuracy. And they're not the only ones. There's all yogis and gurus throughout time, and shaman, and all sorts of people throughout human history have done the same thing, where they've used their biological meditative thought process to peer into areas that far precede scientific inquiry. And then when scientists show up, they validate those organic inquiries that came simply from deep meditation. And meditation, when we acknowledge that the human species has separated itself chiefly on the principle of its mind, of its intellectual abilities, to see the reality for what it is, and then be apprised of new options of how to live in it without having to be in the law of the jungle, then we can also say that meditation is the key evolutionary accessory or skill that has allowed us to enjoy such accelerated evolution. And so in that sense, meditation is the key to our evolution, because it allows us to get into a transcendental state where we're not subject to the normal ratios of time and space. We can get into an area where, let's say it takes a person 4 years in a university setting to learn something to a certain degree. Well, certain people in meditative states can download 4 years worth of information in, you know, a day or less. So, and we can also bypass all of the logistical ignorances and all of the administrative friction and cause and delay, or lag and delay, of all the normal things of just normal terrestrial thinking. But by using meditation, we can accelerate past the normal projectable timelines. And that seems to have been the process by which we were able to evolve the human species into the position it's in today. And of course, that seems to be the process for elevating our consciousness. To raise our consciousness, we have to bring the unconscious into the conscious, which is an act of acknowledgement. And then once we've acknowledged enough things to bring into our meditations, because the acknowledgement is of these new things that were new to us, and then as we bring those into a series of meditations, then the meditations are what allow us to process it in. And by the processing of those things into us through our human system, through meditation, that builds a new fundamental layer of understanding of reality, which is what elevates our consciousness. And it's a positive feedback loop, because as we build and acknowledge the new level of consciousness that is coming in for us, that we're observing, that we're interacting with, that is gained by it through a reliable process of acknowledgement and meditation, And then we go out and we see, okay, we come out of a meditation and we've acknowledged and accepted these things, and then we go out and we live it, and we see that life is a positive feedback loop where it says, yes, now that you have established it for yourself that this is the consciousness level, now that you're walking around, you can see that this is true, because now the reality is interacting with you in accordance with what you learned in your meditation. And that sort of solidifies that level of the consciousness, which then raises the baseline of your brain and your mind. And it says, yes, that is now your baseline. Now you know for yourself that is true. So in a way, acknowledgement and meditation is the process that can lead, or that does lead, to our discernment and the building of our consciousness. Although discernment's a more it's a part of the acknowledgement. Discernment's a little different portion, but like discernment is in there. So when you have discernment and then you begin acknowledging things and then you bring them into your meditations, in meditations is when you can do the accelerated mental and perception work. And that's what builds a person's consciousness. And then you can ascend levels. You can always have access to previous levels of your consciousness. You can always go, you can revisit those. You won't dwell in those, because when you're at your current level of consciousness, you know that's where you reside, because you've raised your baseline to that through a self-directed, self-aware process of bringing the unconscious to the conscious, acknowledgement, and then meditation. And that becomes between you, the philosopher, and the reality itself. And it is a positive feedback loop, and it is also always open to discernment and the scientific method. You bring it in, you put it through your process. If it's true, great. If it's not true, also great. But you just want to know, you need to know. And then as it builds up and the consciousness is established, it will give you stability and give you a fundamental platform to validate your own awareness. Then you can say, like Descartes, I think, therefore I am. Because once you do enough thinking and enough validating of it and making sure, you check on it and you're validating it and you're living with it, and you go, I think, therefore I am, then the whole process becomes a process of self-validation. You go from experience to brain to mind to big mind, and then it comes back in, and then it's going, and then it's flowing, and your life can get into a flow state, and you have your process established, and that is a validation of self, validation of life, and at that point, free will. And it's something that must be attained by the person who's engaged in it, because no one else can validate your free will except for yourself. That's one of those tricky things in that philosophical contemplation. So meditation, there we go. It's deep contemplative thinking. It's what separated us from the animal kingdom and allows for our transcendence, validation of our will, and of ourself and our point of perspective in the universe. So it's how we know we're thinking. It's how we know that we're the one interacting with this, and we're the ones controlling the levers on ourselves, making ourselves think. Well, I hope you found this helpful. Maybe meditate on it later. And thanks for spending some time here at Philosopher's Corner. Have fun, and